Hello, welcome to Brain Injury Radio Network. Tonight is our regular Wednesday installment of our program Recovery Now with your host, Kim Justus. If you'd like to know more about my story, you can find it at inaflash.org. I too am a fellow traumatic brain injury survivor. I appreciate you tuning in tonight, and as always, I look forward to your input. So now, we'll get on with the show. Well, hello from somewhere in Middle America. It's where it's sweltering and humid, but I'm not going to complain because I've seen the forecast down in Arizona, and it doesn't look too good. So glad you could all be here tonight. Again, this is Brain Injury Radio. We're on 7 nights a week. All of the live shows are immediately archived for on-demand listening, so you never need to be alone in your recovery. I think we're up to about 1,400 shows now in the on-demand section with a variety of topics, hosts, and styles, so a little something for everyone. This show, Recovery Now, is a gathering place for anyone seeking recovery from the challenges of life on life's terms. Guests share their experience, strength, and hope. We discuss useful tools that have helped us lighten the load of our journey through recovery. More will be revealed. This is a we recovery program because it is in the we that we find the new me. We focus on the 4 A's of recovery: awareness, acceptance, action, and adaptation. This is a place for survivors striving to become thrivers. The front portion of my show each week, for those of you who are new around here, is a featured guest, and the back portion of my show is open mic and some great indie music sure to inspire. I'm going to get right on with our guest tonight, do some housekeeping a little bit later. This is Brain Injury Radio, and I had a little bit of compromise with the time zone difference, and so our guest isn't going to be here quite as long as I thought. He thought we were an hour earlier, and my apologies for that. But I thought it was very important that we have Eric on tonight. Eric Ratinoff has successfully tried and settled numerous cases on behalf of his clients for matters involving personal injury, product liability, disability insurance claim denials, bad faith denial of insurance claims, traumatic brain injuries, spinal cord injuries, motorcycle accidents, car accidents, medical malpractice cases, defective product cases involving automobiles, household appliances, and industrial equipment, dangerous drugs, defective medical devices, and a wide range of other catastrophic personal injury issues. One of Eric's recent lawsuit victories involves what is believed to be one of the largest medical malpractice jury verdicts in Sacramento County. I think I'm going to read you. Eric has a lot of accomplishments and awards that he's accrued over his career, but I think I'm going to go ahead and bring him on with us live now and start the interview, and after he goes, I'll tell you about a lot more about the accomplishments and awards, which are numerous, that he's received. Eric, are you with me?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Welcome to the show
Great.
tonight. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. It's a
Good.
beautiful evening here in Sacramento.
Oh, I bet it is. Well, I tell you, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show tonight is because something that we really pound home around here, because we've heard what happens when people don't do this, is that when it comes to an attorney or a psychologist or a doctor, whatever the professional would be, but tonight we're talking attorneys, if you've had a brain injury, it's an area of medicine and condition that not a lot is known about. We survivors, I make a joke that it only took me 17 years writing a book and becoming a radio host to meet my first other brain injury survivors. And I've learned more about brain injury in the last 3 years from other survivors than I did from the medical community, that this is just me, or any other outlet. And of course in 95 there wasn't a computer on every desk, and so it was very polarizing and an isolating experience. And so one of the things that we tell people is that if you're going to go out and hire an attorney, don't talk to the neighbor, over the fence, over the backyard fence, or get a referral from Uncle Clem, but you actually want to find professionals in your life who have actually worked in the area of brain injury, who have some familiarity with that which is so unfamiliar to so much of the population that if you want to have a chance of winning, you should probably work with someone who's been up to bat more than once. And so through some referrals and looking some research, I found you, and I saw some of those things that I read earlier. And so I just wanted to talk to you a little bit tonight about reinforcing what I said and telling people why it is a good idea to have an attorney who's worked in the field of brain injury, and maybe just start by telling us just a little bit of your background and what prompted you to make brain injury issues one of your specialties.
Sure. And it's a great point. There are a lot of really good lawyers out there. Lawyers get a bad rap. People love to joke about lawyers, but the truth is a lot of people out there who are representing just ordinary men and women who get hurt in their everyday lives and who are battling injuries. There are a lot of lawyers out there doing really wonderful work for people. But when it comes to a brain injury case, most people out there are not equipped to deal with it. And they're not equipped to deal with it because they haven't come across it or they don't understand the issues. And, clients who have difficulty communicating what's going on with them to their doctors, they have difficulty understanding. When a lawyer is engaged with clients like that who are experiencing brain injury, problems with memory and concentration and executive function, all the different things that we see over and over again, it can be a very frustrating process if, as the lawyer, you don't understand what's going on. And so that's why, if you have a family member with a brain injury or someone that you know and they're looking for a lawyer, or they're going through the process, it really is important to try to connect with an attorney who really has that experience. Now, there are a lot of communities, quite frankly, around the country where those lawyers may not really exist. There are a lot of small communities throughout the country where there isn't a tremendous number of lawyers serving the population, and so in that circumstance, what you really want to try to find, ideally, is some sort of person, whether it's a caregiver, whether it is an occupational therapist, somebody who's involved with the patient, the client, who understands the injury, who's willing to be an advocate, and who's willing to help bridge that gap of understanding and bridge the gap in patience. And I think that's something that is anyone who has dealt firsthand, if you've experienced a brain injury or you're 1 degree of separation from someone with a brain injury, that patience gap, the ability to have the presence of mind and the patience to confront the issues that occur in terms of communication, collaboration, and obtaining the necessary treatment and care, and being able to understand what's going on in a case and what's going on with the person's life. It's really important.
It is. And what made you decide to go down this road?
You know, it's funny. I started doing this type of work about 22 years ago, and I started doing it. I was raised by a father who was a neurologist, and so I was always surrounded by literature related to the brain, and my dad openly discussed with us the brain and psychology and what he did, and he loved neurology, and so growing up, I had the benefit of that. But then as a young lawyer, just my first year as a lawyer, I had a client who was in not even a very big automobile accident. It was one of the early generation airbags that hit her in the face full force, and she had a traumatic brain injury from that. And this was probably 20 to 21 years ago, okay? And, 20 to 21 years ago, the lawyers who were handling brain injury cases and were really sort of focusing on the issues and what was going on, they were few and far between. The neuropsychologists who were out there who were really working on this stuff, in a lot of ways, the field was in its infancy. And there just was not a lot of information out there. But I got involved in the case, and she was just such a wonderful woman, and I tried to learn and understand as much as I possibly could about what was going on with her. And, and part of the problem I ran into was what I know that your listeners who have had brain injuries run into, and then their family caregivers run into, is there's a whole host of people in the medical profession, even today, who just don't understand the issues. And so what happens is when people don't fit into these neat little diagnostic boxes, they tend to get disregarded. And so this particular client, she was disregarded as somebody who was just having some type of psychological issue. They said, well, she's going through menopause. They said, and they come up with this nonsense because they don't understand what's truly going on. And it was through a lot of hard work and a lot of understanding and education that we were able to discover her story, deal with her true illness, and tell her story in a way in which we were able to obtain for her some measure of justice.
When you bring that up, that's something that is kind of a sore spot for me. I got a few sore spots out of this whole deal, but that's really what happened to me and a lot of others out there, is that after the initial pill pelting protocol doesn't work, and they've tried various therapies and what they know to do in the traditional medical model, then suddenly it becomes a mental case. And you just brought it up. It happened with me. I've been a host here for over 3 years. I've heard this over and over and over again. And a joke I like to make, because you got to find a sense of humor in here somewhere, or you'd go crazy, is that if you weren't half cracked, by the time you go through the system and don't get validated or understood, or the help that you're so desperately seeking, then by the time you do land on the shrink couch, you kind of need to be there a little bit. But that wasn't the origin of what started the ball rolling in the first place. That doesn't seem to get dealt with. It gets a psychological label instead of the physical label that it deserves because of the lack of understanding. So do you get a lot of cases like that?
Oh, absolutely. And, and one of the things that ends up being really unfair is, over time, as a whole, as the population, we have grown far more comfortable with seeking help for our mental health issues. And there's a lot of mental health care that people are obtaining now in their everyday lives that they didn't used to, and there are drugs that are prescribed, and people experience anxiety and depression, whether properly diagnosed or not, and whether those medications are administered properly or not. But what ends up happening is you then have some background level of situational depression. Somebody loses a job that they've had for several years, or the economy's bad, or their house is being foreclosed, or their wife leaves them, whatever it is, and they experience symptoms of depression, and then you have that in their background history, and then lo and behold, something comes along and they get a trauma to the head, and they have brief loss of consciousness, and then they have an MRI or a CT scan that shows no intracranial bleed, but they start to develop these symptoms. And what happens is, if in most cases, if they don't quickly recover, the physicians, even if they appropriately initially diagnose them with a concussion and thereafter some post-concussive symptoms, there tends to be this sort of default that if they don't improve within a certain amount of time, they default back to, the person's depressed, or the person has anxiety, or and there is this failure of the medical community to adequately address the true situation of what's going on, of a lingering traumatic brain injury with the effect on executive function and memory, the concomitant fatigue, and then the secondary, and it's a trigger for a secondary depression as a result of the TBI, but it gets misdiagnosed as a primary depression or related to prior depression. And it's really unfortunate, because when the clients are properly tested by a really quality neuropsychologist who knows what he or she is doing, what the testing shows time and again is that there is underlying organic functional limitation that shows up in the testing, and they may also show up as depression, but the depression is shown to be secondary to the brain injury, not the true cause of what is leading to these symptoms that are showing up that are affecting the quality of life. And what that really takes is a process that has started but has a long way to go, and that is to educate the medical community about what is brain injury, how do you diagnose it, how do you assess it, and how do you deal with it.
Right. Interesting. What about medical malpractice as far as, there's first just making a bad call, and I'm not going to make it about me. I'm going to give you two quick back-to-back examples and then have you speak a little bit to the incidents that you've observed in your many years of practicing. But in my case, I had a ruptured brain aneurysm, and when I went to the emergency room, a doctor who had known me, my internist who had known me for 20 years, knew I wasn't a hypochondriac. I was 35 years old. I called him once a year when I got bronchitis. He called in a prescription, and that was it. Never saw the guy. So I find it necessary to come to an emergency room because we don't know it yet, but I'm in the process of having bleeding in my brain. My brain had just ruptured. And he diagnosed me with a muscle spasm in my neck and sent me home with pain pills. Now,
right.
it was the grace of God that something that never happens. I happened to be with my dad that day, and if I wouldn't have been for him, I would have gone home to the home that I lived at alone, and I would have died over the next 24 hours because of the bad call. Now, because I was with my family, they had me stay with them. They wanted to make sure, because it didn't look right to them either, but I was 35 at the peak of health, peak of my career, peak of my life, and nobody could quite figure out what was going on. Plus, I don't think any of us knew what an aneurysm was, and so I needed to stay with them until that pain medication kicked in, and then they would take me home. Well, that never happened, and it took until the next day for me to get back, when I couldn't talk or comprehend, and then slid into a coma, was put on ice for 5 days, and then had a craniotomy to figure out. It was 24 hours until I went back to the hospital and got a CAT scan that readily showed I had a bleeding brain aneurysm. And,
Sure.
For me, I feel lucky, I am lucky, that things worked the way that they did for me, but I'm going to take a leap here and assume that there might be, because of the lack of knowledge, a lot of misdiagnosis out there when it comes to brain injury. And one other thing I've heard, you brought up car accidents and motorcycle accidents, is that one person brought up an interesting concept once, and I wonder if you have a take on this. Say the person gets in that accident and they've broken an arm and they've broken ribs and their nose is broken and they got a lot of different things. Somebody shared with me once on a show that they look at the obvious things first. They fix that broken leg and they deal with a lot of the obvious things, and after just shining a light in your eyes, that's about it. They don't go the step. Maybe they do now that we're out in the sunlight a little bit, but in the old days, a lot of times brain injuries were missed altogether because they treated the obvious and didn't go looking for what was probably going to be lurking underneath the obvious.
Well, yeah, and it's more than that. For a long time, I mean, we're just now getting to a recognition when it comes to brain injury. It's a relatively recent phenomenon when this understanding that early diagnosis and intervention can have a profound effect on outcome, and that's what the statistics are showing. But historically, I mean, if we talk about the last 20, 30 years, historically, I mean, there was a belief that if somebody sustained a brain injury, I mean, even assuming they were diagnosing it, which for the most part they weren't, but if they sustained a brain injury, there was this mistaken belief that once the brain's been injured, there's no recovery. And what really so much of the more recent literature and study is showing is that early intervention and treatment can make a world of difference, and even intervention that is geared towards even if you cannot repair the brain has this immense ability to repair the manner in which it functions. And there is our brains do a terrific job. Not always, but there is a terrific job that often occurs of the brain reconnecting the pathways in a manner that allows people to gain function that was otherwise lost. And as we go forward, we're going to understand that a lot better. But to get back to your question, really, I mean, we see the medical mistakes time and again where they do exactly what you said. And it reminds me of a case I just started looking at this week for a gentleman where he was in an accident. He had major trauma. He had fractures to the vertebrae in his neck and his upper back, and he had fractured multiple bones in his face. And what they did, they took him in right away for surgery to stabilize the neck fractures and to fuse him at a couple of levels so that he wouldn't have a serious spinal cord injury. And he was intubated with a breathing tube. Well, that breathing tube was providing the architecture for his airway because the trauma to his face and the fractures of the bones in his face and his sinuses were such that without the breathing tube, the structure would collapse and close off his airway. Well, they went forward after stabilizing the neck. Within a day and a half, they go to remove the breathing tube. And then over the next 5 or 6 hours, his airway collapses and his oxygen is cut off. And as a result, he now has a fairly serious brain injury, an anoxic brain injury, because his airway was cut off. That led to a cardiac arrest. They had to code him, and they bring him to, and they establish a new airway. But by then, the damage has been done. It's exactly the kind of scenario that you were talking about, where there was a big focus on the obvious issue, and then there was a failure to anticipate and then to give credence to the less obvious issues, but the ones that are equally as important and equally as damaging. And we see it very, very often in the medical situation.
Hand in hand with that is our over-medicated society and the defense in this organic brain syndrome that we get. And it's funny, you might have used different terminology, but I describe it as that because the game-changing event was the event or the episode. What we carry with us, a lot of us, for the rest of our life is something else. And so I've chosen to call it an organic brain syndrome. But since pills seem to be a first line of defense, I'll make another leap and say that if we're not, and even if we are very careful as survivors to write down every medication we take with the dose, give it to every single doctor we see, hopefully trade at one pharmacy, we'll be putting in most of the fail-safes we can do. But with so many pills out there, they're going to treat us for possible seizures, depression, possible anxiety, all kinds of other pills for pain, for migraines, just a myriad of pills that people are on. I'm assuming that some of that malpractice gets into the area of bad drug interactions. I'm hearing more about that in the news, and I'm assuming that is also true in the brain injury community.
Well, absolutely. We see. I do a lot of medical malpractice work, and the largest area of medical malpractice outside. I mean, there's in broadest sense, sort of hospital-based errors are huge, but the errors associated with the administration and prescription and dispensing of drugs is by percentage one of the largest areas of medical malpractice. And what happens is there are numerous drug interactions that are not accounted for by the prescribing physicians, or as is often the case, you'll have one physician prescribing one set of medication. For example, you'll have somebody who's on an antidepressant. You can imagine it. So you start to take medication, okay, and your body essentially clears medication in a couple of different ways. it'll clear it either through your liver or through your kidney. Okay? And so the problem is, and if you have somebody who has a different medication, so for example, there are some medications that slow down what's called the creatinine clearance of the kidney, meaning it slows down the rate at which your kidney will filter urine and dispose of those wastes that are filtered out by the kidney. And so if your creatinine clearance, if your kidney is operating more slowly than normal, but you're taking a drug that gets cleared through the kidney, okay, what ends up happening is you slowly overdose on that medication. And there are a lot of medications that, even if they don't have a direct effect on the brain, there are a lot of medications that if you overdose on them will cause you to go into cardiac arrest. And cardiac arrest is a major cause of brain injury because your heart stops beating, the oxygen doesn't get to the brain. And it's another one of my pet peeves. You know, people talk so often about depression following cardiac arrest, following heart attacks, and you hear it over and over again. It's not uncommon to have serious depression following a heart attack. And one of my big pet peeves is that almost nobody's doing any neuropsychological testing on these people, but the truth is a lot of people who experience a significant cardiac event who are exhibiting symptoms of depression are, in truth, exhibiting symptoms of brain injury as a result of the anoxic effect of the cardiac event. And we see that over and over and over again. And in cases where it's, it comes to us because somebody's realized, there's been a medication error here, there's been an interaction between two drugs, or there's been an overdose in the medication because the physicians or the hospital failed to adequately track the manner in which the kidney was clearing the drug. And then we see the after effects, not only in the heart attack, but in the brain injury itself.
Wow. That is something that I didn't know about at all. I do know that doctors are not pharmacologists, and so you can get in dangerous territory when you're listening to drug reps. And one observation I've made is that I can go into a room of people, and I call it the drug du jour, and it's whatever is being advertised at the moment in any given category of health problem. And you can go Celexa, Lexapro, Celexa, Lexapro, and now it's Cymbalta, Lyrica, Cymbalta, Lyrica, Cymbalta, Lyrica.
Mm-hmm.
Generation, all of a sudden, the doctors, every other one of us, if we're on any of those kinds of medications, are on the drug du jour. And, those haven't been adequately tested. And one of the problems that I found, aside from, God, that's horrifying, the scenario that you just gave, but is also secondary conditions. This is such a huge field, this whole thing with brain injury, because a lot of the medications that I got treated with in the beginning caused me secondary problems like gastro problems, kind of ate out my stomach lining in a way, and gave me problems I didn't have before while not fixing whatever it was prescribed for, whatever symptom of my brain injury it was prescribed for. The drug didn't wind up treating that, but did give me another issue to deal with. So I think that whole area of pharmacology is really one to be watched, and we have a lot of shows on here about integrative medicine. I'm not at all saying we throw the baby out with the wash, but we really need to take a closer look at what the first line of defense is right now, and instead of making it be, the fastest emerging market of drug dealers being in a corner office instead of standing on a corner, That really needs to change and maybe get more in the textbook, where they learn about brain injury than just tossing pills like M&Ms out there to people and possibly having things more minor like I'm talking about, which I thought was major until I heard what you had to say. And that's downright
well, and one of the
scary.
things that you want for those of your listeners who are care providers or significant others or husbands or wives or parents of somebody with brain injury or somebody with a brain injury who's actively engaged in their own care. When a lot of these drugs are prescribed, there is, if it's, especially drugs that have a relative risk of overdose that results in significant ill effects, and there are a lot of drugs out there like that. If the drug is being cleared via urine through the kidneys, or whether it's being cleared via the filtration of the blood through the liver, okay, there will be, if people are on these drugs chronically, and a lot of drugs people are, they're on them for months or years.
Yes.
The physicians should be ordering routine urinalysis and or routine blood work. And what they're looking for, and what they should be looking for, are changes in the function of liver and the function of the kidney. And if those things start to appear, number one, the first thing people need to do is start thinking about what drugs am I on that could be causing this. And the second thing they should be thinking about is what drugs am I on that as a result of this effect on my liver and kidney and or kidneys, what drugs am I on that could now be resulting in potential overdose. And we see this again and again in people who have bipolar disorder. There's really a very high incidence of bipolar disorder, even just the properly diagnosed bipolar disorder out there. And there are a lot of people on lithium. Well, lithium, if it's not being really cleared, and lithium has a very narrow therapeutic range. So you're either too low or too high on the level of lithium in your bloodstream. They really have to manage that lithium level. And if your lithium level goes too high, it can have catastrophic neurologic effects. And you can end up with essentially a form of a Parkinson's-like syndrome. And I've seen it again and again and again in cases where there will be, for example, a cardiac class of medications to deal with the hypertension that reduces the ability of the kidney to clear the lithium, and then the lithium slowly builds up, and you've got the psychiatrist who's prescribing the lithium and monitoring that, but you've got the primary care doctor who's managing the medication for the hypertension, and they're not talking and they're not paying attention to what the other drug is doing, and before you know it, you have an overdose of lithium.
Wow. Let me ask you a question then about that. When you said regularly getting the blood and urine checked for your liver and kidney function, I had kind of a not-so-funny story. I went in for my annual physical, and this time I wrote down a list because I've gotten up in pain for 20 years and had some things that I have more urgency about addressing or trying to get some help for or therapy for if it's out there after 2 decades because of what I've heard here. And so I thought I was smart because I've meant to do this the last couple of years, and I forget half of it by the time I get there. So I took copious notes. I went into the doctor, and I start reading him this list and giving him an example of each thing, and I get finished, and apparently they're taking sensitivity courses now because he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, your labs came out great. We'll see you next year. That was it. Were you waiting for something more? What my question is, in the routine tests that you get when you go in to get a physical every year, when they take your blood and you get a urine test, would they see that kind of dysfunction you're talking about, or does it take a special kind of test? I mean, is there a hope that if my liver function or kidney function would have been off the chart, it would have shown up in the routine tests that I get in a physical annually?
Hello?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you.
Oh, okay. I lost hear you for a minute.
Okay.
Did you get that?
Well, so
that
what I started to say is it really depends on sort of the drug and the situation. So just to use lithium as an example, once again, so when somebody is on lithium, there's not only for the most part, the lithium, they do sort of routine testing of the lithium level. The problem is that the standard of care in terms of testing the lithium level is that it is tested at sort of a wide interval. So it can be, a couple of months before you get tested again, okay? But which is all fine and well, assuming your kidney function hasn't changed. But so you can imagine a situation where right before they test lithium, right before the psychiatrist tests the lithium level, the primary care doctor puts the patient on a new drug for the hypertension, which starts to affect the kidney function, but it's too soon to show up on that first lithium level. Well, the lithium level comes back, and it's still within the therapeutic range, but then you got another 2 or 3 months maybe before they're testing the lithium level again. And it may be that within 2, 3, 4 weeks, the kidney function has declined rapidly. And then you've still got this long period of time before the lithium is being tested again.
Right.
And so, it's complicated, and there needs to be, it's one thing that's really important for everyone, especially people, I think everyone, but especially people with a brain injury, is everybody should have, I think it should be a plastic embossed list that they have of all their medications, all their dosages, and the frequency that they take them on a daily basis, and who's prescribing them, and where they're dispensed. And every time that somebody goes to the doctor's office, they should make sure that office photocopies that plastic embossed sheet so that the physician's office always has an updated record of exactly what medications people are on.
Agreed. I agree. Well, I know that we were an hour off on our scheduling, my fault, difference in time zones, and that you've got to get onto an engagement tonight. But is there, I guess the thing that I'd like to say is what we've discussed for the last 45 minutes tells me why it's so important, if I need an attorney, to have one who specializes in brain injury, because in a short time, you've just been a wealth of knowledge and obviously know what you're talking about. When you go in a couple minutes, I'm going to be reading the remainder of your bio just to reinforce that. But is there anything you'd like to say in closing before you go? And I promise to the audience out there, I will have Eric back in the future, and we'll have some time to answer questions. But I'm also going to give you his website. If you're out there and you think that you have a legal case that merits looking into, certainly get a hold of his office, and he'll be able to either help you or refer you or tell you that maybe, this isn't a doable deal. And we'll take care of all of that after he goes. But, boy, it's just been really enlightening to have you on tonight, Eric. And time aside, I appreciate the fact that you made it and are proving why what we keep telling our listeners is so very important. You just demonstrated it in a short period of time. Is there any closing comments you'd like to make?
Really the only thing I'd like to say in closing is first, thank you so much for having me on your show. I've really appreciated the opportunity, and I think it's just wonderful what you're doing to help the community of people, as I understand it, around the world. You have a listenership that is worldwide, and a community of people that can benefit so much from learning from people from all walks of life and all experience levels in terms of dealing with brain injury. And I really just wanted to say, in my 22 years of representing people who have been injured, the people with brain injuries are absolutely among my favorite clients, because they're people who are overcoming this immense struggle in terms of being understood and in terms of understanding themselves and their place in the world, and the amazing heroic efforts they make to try to reconnect and reattain some normalcy in their lives. And you see it over and over again, and the care providers in their lives and the people who surround them and help provide them guidance and love and keep them connected to the world around them in a healthy, positive way are my heroes. And I've seen so many wonderful, wonderful people who have helped, and really through the strength and power of their love and their commitment, who have just done such wonderful things. And so my hat's off to all your listeners who fall in those categories, and I would love to come back and speak to you further anytime.
Good. Well, we'll really look forward to that. I did have one question in the chat before you go. Do you advise or have an opinion one way or another on electronic medical records? Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, that's a huge, huge subject, and so I have lots of opinions about electronic medical records. In some ways they're good, and in other ways they're awful. Electronic medical records, what I encounter is it allows for a greater continuity within a particular healthcare system, but the problem is that really what we end up seeing are non-patient specific macros that get posted in the medical records that do not really truthfully identify what has transpired in that interaction with the patient. And that's a real problem with electronic medical records. But,
Agreed.
There are pros and there are cons, as with almost everything in life and every choice we make. But electronic medical records is a topic for an entire day's discussion.
Well, that's good. Then we know what the next discussion will be about. Why don't we talk about
that? I hope not.
Well, I'm going to leave you with one thought why I think it's bad. I'll talk to the audience about why it's good. But I used to do a little writing, and I wrote a piece on, I'm a big dog lover, and there was a new disease our dogs started getting vaccinated for a number of years ago. And I was looking, they gave me my electronic medical record to look at to see if everything was right on it. They had a list of my conditions. One of my conditions was leprocytosis. Well, I don't have that. That's a dog disease, okay? I wrote an article about it. Now, a person could get it, but I've never been proven to have it, been tested for it, and it's on my medical record. So there's my electronic medical record. With that, I hope you have a great time at your function with your daughter tonight, and I will look forward to having you back again.
Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to it as well. Good night, everyone.
Good night, Eric. Okay, everybody, that was Eric Ratinoff, and I'm going to read you just a little bit more. I apologize for his short visit tonight. His assistant had a little confusion with the time zone difference and had him down for 6 o'clock, not 7 o'clock his time. And he did have an engagement. He promised he would come back. But I think the point was made tonight that we've been talking about, a lot of the hosts have been talking about, and that's that there is no panacea in professionals out there, whether they're attorneys or doctors or candlestick makers. But the closer you can get to someone who is a quote-unquote expert in their field, the better chance you're going to have the best representation, whether it's medically or whether it's by an attorney. Now, Eric Ratinoff is an AV-rated attorney by Martindale Habel. He has been recognized in both federal and state courts as an aggressive and experienced plaintiff's lawyer, and has been nominated by his peers in Northern California as a super lawyer in 2010, 2011, 2012, and 2013. In 2014, Eric was named among Sacramento's top lawyers in the Sacramento Business Journal's Best of the Bar publication. In 2013, Eric was awarded by the Capital City Trial Lawyers Association for his outstanding work in the community, naming him Humanitarian of the Year after the namesake of his mentor, Mort Friedman. Eric is both an alumni and faculty member of the Jerry Spence Trial Lawyers College and frequently lectures at seminars around the country on the subjects of personal injury litigation, automobile accident litigation, trial practice, and evidence. In 2013, he was elected to the board of directors of both the California Brain Injury Association and the Consumer Attorneys of California, and was invited to become a member of Cien Amigos, a coalition of community leaders working toward mutual prosperity of both California and Mexico. Some of his most notable awards and accomplishments include National Trial Lawyers Top 100, Northern California Super Lawyer, Martindale Hubble AV Rated Attorney, CCTLA Mort Friedman Humanitarian of the Year, Brain Injury Association of California Board of Directors of the Consumer Attorneys of California, former President, Secretary, and Vice President of Capital City Trial Lawyers Association, member of National Association of Personal Injury Lawyers, member of Insurance Bad Faith Trial Lawyers Association, member of Cien Amigos, former president and member of the board of directors of Sierra Forever Families, former member of the Northern California AIPAC, and finally, founder of California Farm to Table, a website promoting the patronage of local farmers and wineries through California. So, Eric's got a little aside there, too. Again, for those of you who came on, Eric Ratinoff was my guest tonight. He's an attorney who specializes for over 20 years in brain injury-related issues and is truly an expert in his field. His website, if you'd like to look that up, is www.ericratinoff.com. and you can get more information about him there. Or if you're out there and you think that you have a case and would like to know if you think it's the case, you can contact him at his. It also gives his email. Drop him an email or give him a phone call, and see if there's some advice or guidance that he can give you. But again, the moral to this story tonight is just look for the winners in each field that you have to deal in, whether you're looking for a new psychiatrist, psychologist, internist, attorney. They're working for you. You know, a lot of times we're shy about things because we don't know if we're on foot or horseback. Right after our brain injuries, we didn't really know anything about brain injury before it happened, and it's one of those confusing, foggy times for us. And so we might wonder if we have a course of action and ask our buddy, hey, do you know a good attorney? And they give you a name, and we proceed with those people. Well, if we've already conceded that the traditional medical model doesn't know a lot about brain injury, they're learning more each year, but at one time there was a page and a half in the standard medical text about the lasting effects of brain injury. So we've got people who have very little knowledge out in the public, in the medical profession, and out there amongst attorneys. And so if you need one, the first question you want to ask to the doctors, to the attorneys, to any professional you need, because they work for you and you've got no reason to be shy, is to come right out and ask them, how much experience do you have specifically dealing with brain injury-related cases? And if they pause even a moment, or say a little bit, or give you a deflective answer, or say, well, I've handled a couple of those, run, don't walk out of the office until you can find someone who actually has a pedigree of working on the subject that you need help with. Because otherwise, we could go do it ourselves and be almost as successful as some of the horror stories I've heard out there about attorneys and medical professionals that really didn't know anything much about brain injury, just enough to get themselves and their clients or patients in trouble.